Welcome back to another episode with Wellness with Mo. Hi, my name is Mo, and this week's episode we have an expert in navigating uncertainties of life. With us is Laura Toop. I hope I pronounced your name right, Laura. And I'm
Spot on, though.
yeah, I'm so excited to really understand what you do. So it's an honor for me to have you with us. I mean, yeah, I love amazing guests that come here. They're so amazing. Their stories are amazing, and I want to know your story, Laura. What made you who you are?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Mo. I'm very privileged to be here and to be with your audience and your listeners. So what makes me me? Um, and why navigating uncertainty is my speciality, as it were. Um, so let me take you back to recent history, I guess.
Yeah.
So as the story goes, I have to remember how many years ago it is now, but it will be 9 years in July.
Yeah.
My life spectacularly imploded. And within the space of about 6 to 8 weeks, I literally lost everything. My husband died. I then lost my health, and then I lost my career. And
that is one tough journey, really, to have all of them.
Yeah, and it all happened very, very quickly. That was the challenge.
Yeah.
And from diagnosis, my husband had pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to dying, it was 11 months.
Okay.
And at the time, I held a senior leadership role within the company that I was working in. And, as we do in life, we go, yeah, I can deal with this, just add it to the to-do list. Of course I can. I've dealt with worse in my life, because I have back many, many moons previously. But I think you don't realize how much literal uncertainty you go through. And I certainly didn't. So unsurprisingly, my health impacted, went back to work, and then ultimately that fell apart then. And by the end of 2015, I had major surgery to sort out my ill health. And literally Christmas 2015, it took the sharpness of my then 4-year-old nephew to pointedly say to his auntie Lollipops, which is what they call me.
Okay.
Now that Uncle Chris is dead, you have nothing. I'm thinking, thank you. Hugo, I feel so, you've just summed it up. But he did say to me, but it's okay, I will look after you for 100 days.
Okay.
So, but as you can imagine, I was 42 at that time. And I had, he wasn't wrong. I had lost everything. And I was navigating a world in which I didn't recognize, I had no map for, and I certainly hadn't asked for. And I felt like I was living in a parallel universe, wading through treacle. And it was one of these sort of almost out-of-body experiences. I can't describe it in any other way. And, you get people saying to you, oh, well, you can do this and you can do that. And you're just going, but that's not going to help me. That's not going to effectively save my life. So, I was determined many, many moons ago, and I am talking back into my early teens. And this is why I talk about really understanding uncertainty and navigating those, not just the odd curveball and the odd lemon. I mean, the entire orchard of lemons. And because at age 13, I had a water skiing accident, and I ultimately lost my mobility.
Okay.
But back then, I hadn't got the skills to know what was going on, this emotional overwhelm that I felt. So the only thing I knew how to control, when the consultants couldn't see the problem and I wasn't in school, and this was before the internet and mobile phones and all that, so I was socially isolated, and I had an overly protective mother. So the only thing I could control was something external to me, and that was food. So I just stopped eating. No surprises, but you know, a couple of years later, I am in full throes of a severe eating disorder. I did have bilateral hip and back surgery, but that problem, which I had resolved, had made way for an unhelpful coping strategy. And the reason I mention it because it took me a very long time to get over that. I very nearly, you know, through what I was doing to myself, because I got so caught up in it, very nearly died and was told I would never make 30 if I carried on that path. But having overcome that, when my world imploded 9 years ago, I was determined that I was never going to go back to that space that I'd overcome. But equally, I wasn't going to go back to a place where I was going to push harder, do more, because that really is just an unhelpful coping strategy as well. So tiring of all the platitudes, I flew myself off 5,000 miles away, you know, and sat on the proverbial beautiful beach in the middle of the Caribbean Ocean. Caribbean Sea, and there on the beautiful island of Aruba, which is ironically called the Happy Island by its locals, I then began to put the pieces together of my life using the only two things I had left, which was my ability to business plan and myself, because none of us are not nothing. We are all someone, and that is a very good place to start. And so Project Me was born on a beach 8 years ago, actually, because it was a good 6 months after, you know, the world had imploded. So Project Me was born 8 years ago on a beach in the middle of the Caribbean in Aruba, and that became my, you know, path to where I am now. And it drew from what I call my brand me. So my brand me is who am I, what matters the most to me, and what did I want to feel. And what I wanted to feel was alive. And so everything around my life today is all in pursuit of that. So my life, as I say, doesn't look anything like what it did 9 years ago. 9 years ago, I was corporate, leading business change and transformation. So you get the link here. It's just not business transformation, it's now life transformation. And so, you know, I've moved, you know, I'm based in the UK, so I've moved 90 miles around the M25, which is a long way in the UK. To a town I didn't know, bought a house and renovated that house into a home. I've retrained, requalified, and set up a business in which I now work. So like I said, my life is completely different on account of Project Me and really coming to grips with brand me. It is distinctly more fulfilling, it is distinctly more purposeful, and it is distinctly less stressful because I'm alive with myself.
Yeah, I can totally, Laura, relate to what you're saying. And Michelle, who was one of my guests 2 weeks ago, we were discussing the same thing, that as human beings, we all have like a point in time where there's something that happened that profoundly changed our perspective and trajectory of life, profoundly woke us up and said, you're not going to the right place, you're not going to where you want. So I really am really inspired by your story, because as I always say to everyone, God always puts us in certain tests.
Yes.
So he tested you in a very, very harsh test, and definitely if I was
I've been tested though.
if I were in your shoes, I would have gone crazy. I mean, it takes a certain person to overcome all what you had. It's not an easy thing. I mean, yes, death is there, and yes,
Yeah.
the ability to lose a job is there, and the ability of being stressed and burnt out is there. But to have it
Yeah.
all sequentially happening to you, that is, I mean, that's a killer. So I really, you know, give you all my respect for
Thank you.
have done. I myself, my journey is a little bit less heart aching, but it's still a journey. Um, I was working in a big company in Egypt, mobile company. Left it. That was in early 2020. Left it. Joined a small company, and guess who came to the scene? The pandemic. So
Yeah.
I'm a victim of the pandemic. But I wouldn't say a victim, because I think the pandemic for me was a sign from the universe
Yeah.
that you need to change. I'm going to put you on a very difficult path, and you need to become something different.
Yeah.
I never imagined myself to become a podcast. That wasn't my dream, but I let myself take it slowly. It started out as, you know, a hobby like everything else in the world.
Yeah, of course.
And
Something
you know,
you're passionate about.
yeah, I was passionate about, you know, mental health, because that is what I felt during the few years I was in the mobile company. That is what I felt, because I was out of a job during a very difficult time where there were no jobs and people were going crazy, literally.
Yeah.
It was a very unique setting that people didn't understand um, where they're going to go. Are they going to go back to work? Is it remote? Is it a hybrid model? Is so people didn't understand. And of course the relationship between spouses, you know, increase. There was a lot of tension, because, you know, I'm working, you're working,
Yeah.
and at the end we have the kids at home, and it's a really big, you know, mix up. But for me, the pandemic, uh, it might have been something bad for the whole world, but for me,
Yeah.
it's a great teacher. For me, it's a great teacher. I don't think
Oh,
God
I
would
agree.
have, if He wanted to send a teacher from the heavens, He wouldn't have sent something as powerful as this.
Yeah.
This is where I put myself. I've been on this journey. Uh, I've been very resilient, very patient. You know, transforming myself from a person who's a victim, who felt that the world is against him. And
Yeah.
I think you also would have felt the same thing, maybe even worse. You're a victim. Why God did this happen to me all in one go? I mean, and it's
Well,
natural.
exactly.
I mean, it's a natural reaction from us. But today I find uh, I try and guide people live mindfully and live in the present moment where they are. So I wanted to ask you one question. So part of what you're saying on LinkedIn is that from pain to passion. So
Yeah.
what do you mean by from pain to passion? I'm just intrigued.
So, I mean, I think the thing is it's the classic of, you know, pain can be a teacher. It just depends how you choose to look at it. So, pain is a feeling ultimately. And through what we notice, what we feel, that, you know, I don't talk about emotions being right or wrong. They are merely signals. And they're telling us something that is either that we're really aligned with, that we find joy from, or in my case, that I feel alive on account of, or something that we're noticing. But it's in observing and acknowledging those things that we can uncover our passion. So let me give you an example. So out of the journey that was with my husband, when I after he died, I was very angry. And just for the sake of, you know, your listeners, I don't buy into the 5 stages of grief. Grief is chaotic. You will feel things totally out of sequence, but anger is one of many things that you feel. But I did feel very angry. But the anger wasn't necessarily at him per se. It was his lack of communication towards the end with me about certain things, where he had buried his head in the sand. And what that signal was telling me was that actually, for me, open and honest dialogue is very, very important. Connecting with people authentically and on a level is very important to me. So what that enables me to do is then go, okay, so right, now I've turned this pain into something I'm actually want to connect with, the passion. So what are then the things that I can do? You know, I'm sitting here with you because I am passionate about talking with others and being curious into another's world, because that's how I learn. That's what brings me alive. So I've turned my pain into my passion. And then what might stop me doing those things? So I now go into sort of like the third part of the work I do, which is how do you ensure that you truly attain it? Because we can act so far, but to attain that and to truly flourish, we have to understand what might stop us. So I unfortunately still have challenges on account of the health issues I had 9 years ago. So I have to be really mindful that, you know, the support I give myself is that I proactively pace myself with how much I commit to in any one day, so that when I do show up, I am showing up in the best way that I can for them, but also for myself. Because if I didn't, that then feeds back into my pain. Does that make sense? So it's like kind of, that's how the pain to passion thing works. It is literally those 3 A's, you know, acknowledging, acting, attaining, and what I call 6 baseline questions, which is, where are you now? How am I feeling? What am I feeling, stroke noticing, depending what your primary, you know, indicator of the emotion is. I feel, others notice, but that's just me. And then what is it that you want to feel? Invariably, it's the complete opposite to the feeling you're actually feeling. You know, what can you do that will enable you to take one step towards that? So that's your action. So you've now got clarity and focus. You've got the motivation because it matters to you and it's within your control.
Yeah.
And then the attainment is, well, what might stop me? What support can I seek? Because it isn't getting started that's the problem. It is maintaining our momentum that is the challenge. It's why New Year's resolutions never last beyond 2 weeks into January, is because we have
don't last beyond 2 hours. So.
Yeah, for most people. So hopefully that helps. You know,
it helps. But it must be definitely your clients. If you have someone who's going through the same, you know, agony or journey. I don't want to sound too melodramatic, but you know, the journey that you have, definitely have a different perspective. You're more empathetic, because I think a lot of people would say it's okay, don't worry, you know, life is short, you'll get over it. No, I don't think that the people have that kind of perspective like you do, from losing a spouse to losing your health to losing your job. So if someone came to you with that kind of, I mean, I don't know if that happened, with that kind of issue, what's the first thing would you tell them or to do?
What in the sense that they believe that they can get over it?
Yeah. And what would you tell them or guide them to do to, you know, accept what happened and move?
So I specifically don't use the word accept.
Okay.
So that's probably one thing. So I very specifically use the word acknowledge, because I don't accept that my husband died young. I do acknowledge that he is dead and he's not coming back. So that is a fundamental part of the process that I go with. And so I really spend time. I think the difference between, although I do, and I'm trained in various counseling and, therapies, as well as coaching, the difference between standalone counseling is there's lots of talking and no action. Because my view is that talking gets you so far, but it will not get you really moving forward and taking differences. Because especially when it comes to grief or when it comes to life-changing events, they say, oh, you'll get through it and time heals, and all of these platitudes are not very helpful. What does happen, however, is that it's a phrase that's often used, you grow around the event. Now, the only way you can grow around the event that's happened that you cannot change. So, I had a water skiing accident. I couldn't change that. I grew around it by creating more things. Now, the only way that you can grow around it is by taking action. But you can't take focused action that is meaningful to you unless you have acknowledged where you're at. So often when a client comes to me, so I'm thinking of one in particular that I've worked with recently, and she was very much in this position that it was a behavior that she was noticed. She was avoiding somebody. But actually, when we peeled back the layers to it, she kind of realized that she thought perhaps it was related to her brother's unexpected and premature death, but hadn't really kind of pinpointed it at all. So what we did was we went back to, okay, let's just ground where we are at now, and literally almost just talk at me, because I think that's the point, is so often we carry on being busy that we don't take a pause long enough just to go, for want of a better way of describing it. But it's that process where, in a world where there's so many rules and regulations about how we need to be so eloquent, how we need to communicate, etc., having a space where we don't have to, it might just come out as words that don't really string together as a sentence. And with this client, when I first started working with her, it was very much, she was all over the place because she couldn't make sense of what was going on in her head. But by being able to effectively just download to me, and we were able to tease out what was really going on for her, that allowed her to take the necessary steps to grow around the situation that had happened, that meant this avoidance behavior that she'd been experiencing, she no longer was avoiding, because it was more, the avoidance was more, she just couldn't deal with any more overwhelm in her head because she hadn't dealt with the problem about her brother's unexpected and premature death.
Yeah, I have an interesting question that just came when you were talking. Does the person, is it different for a person with a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset when they deal with grief? Because I think the guy with the guy or the lady with the growth mindset is going to deal with grief, but she or he will be able to overcome and push on, resist, and deal with life as it comes.
I don't know. It's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And
because I'm very interested. The book Mindset by Carol Dweck. I love the book. I read it. Really interested in the fixed growth mindset, and I know that human beings have both kind of mindset, but usually you're more growth than fixed, or you're more fixed than growth. Certain aspects, but I'm just curious in terms of.
It's really interesting, Mo, because I think, and the reason I'm hesitating is because I think when you're thrown into a world, as I was, mean, and it's hard because I would say that I probably do have a growth mindset by virtue of all of the stuff that's happened, from a very, very early age. But I do think there's an element of, when you're thrown into a world where, as I said earlier on, you've got no map for, you don't recognize the terrain, and you haven't asked for it, and your life up until that point had been going swimmingly well, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. There's part of me that says, actually, you're suddenly thrown into a world where you feel very, very restricted, and almost to the point of claustrophobia, is the way I would describe it. And so I don't, how much of that comes down to whether you have a fixed mindset or a growth mindset as to whether you can step out. It's a really interesting question, because I would say that actually it's more about, ultimately there becomes a tipping point where the pain of sitting in what I often describe as the teacup of salty water, because that's what it is. Yeah. And you're on the high seas as well in your teacup, thinking, holy, where do I get to? Doesn't matter how much of a positive mindset you have, because this is a terrain you don't know, you haven't got a map, and this is a landscape you hadn't asked for. So, it's not it doesn't matter how much of a positive mindset you might have, because that's the terrain that you're suddenly finding yourself in. So I think, if anything, I would say for me, it's, I often, in NLP, they'll talk about things whether you see in time or through time. Yeah. I'm very much through time. So I will see, my past is to the left and my future is to the right, not my past is behind me and my future is in front of me, which is the difference between the two types of seeing time. And the thing is when everything is taken away from you, you have to see in the moment, in time. So the biggest struggle when you're like me, who predominantly sees through time, is that's where the overwhelm just goes into literal overdrive. And therefore almost having a positive mindset in that space, because you think, I know I need to do all of this. Yeah. I know, in a what's the word I want? In a
perfect world.
Yeah, in a perfect world with everything happening. Yeah, I know what I need to do. Yeah. But there was so much I had to do that I had never done before. Yeah. It wasn't a case of just going, I know I can do it, because you're also dealing with all of the emotional overwhelm, which, trust me, until you've actually experienced it, it is the hardest thing to describe. Yeah. Other than feeling like you're in an overloaded washing machine, you can't, think top loader, American style. Heaven forbid, people are trying to put more washing into it. It's spinning out of control, and you're like, where's the off button? And you're about to go off into another planet. And you don't know how to turn it off. You need somebody else to ground that. That has to come from somebody else. Yeah. And I'm very hesitant about whether a fixed mindset or positive mindset would have made a difference.
It's a difficult question. I agree, because I myself, I don't know the answer, because at that point of time when that happens, if there's grief, human beings react differently to the grief. I mean, some cry, some don't cry, and just full of shock. So it's doesn't. I don't think it will. For me, I don't think it's going to really matter at that point of time. But no. I think going on with life, what's next? What okay, so I was thrown this curveball, and all right, it hit me. All right. So what's next? Am I going to wait for the next curveball to hit me, or am I going to take, you know, control of my life and my responsibility? Because why I ask you this question is, for me, of course, I didn't go the grief area, except of
Mhm.
course that my grandmother, who I cherished and loved,
Mhm.
passed away when she was like 92, in the midst of the pandemic, and I wasn't able to stay with her
Mhm.
for a long time, and she had hip surgery, and at that age, of course, doing hip surgery is
Mm.
quite a thing. Um, but when she passed away, she was she passed away at home, and she was so peaceful.
Mhm.
But I wasn't crying. I was sad, but I didn't cry.
Yeah.
I didn't feel. My uncle was very emotional. My mom, not emotional. She
Yeah.
was grieving, but no, I felt that she was very cold. I didn't want to say that because it's not the appropriate time, but I didn't feel she was able to handle it correctly. I don't know,
Yeah.
and for me to say that to my mom would be, quite inappropriate at that time. But that is why I was asking you this question, because maybe my grandma is expected. Let's say expected to
I think
pass
it's
away.
still a shock when it happens. I
Of
think
course,
it's the connections you have with that individual and the attachments. It's the
of course,
change of identity that goes on. That I don't think anybody realizes that, the loss of somebody in your life, you can't, it's the famous Heraclitus quote that is, you're not the same man, it's not the same river
yeah,
quote. And therein lies the thing, is you can't go back to yesterday because yesterday doesn't exist anymore, and we have to recognize that we change and we evolve as people. And
exactly.
so that's where I can see, if you're fixed in your mindset, that would prevent you from taking a step forward. Because if you're not prepared, even if you don't know how, for all the reasons I've described before,
Mm,
that's how you can end up remaining stuck
mm,
in that darkness, I guess, ultimately, because it doesn't get any better because you're not acting upon anything to bring light into that dark space.
yeah,
But I think it's, you know, for me, it was very much a push of, I can't live like this for the rest of my days. I have no idea what it looks like
yeah.
back 8 years ago. And that's obviously what Project Me came into, or how it came into being.
It's the same. It's the same um, self-talk that I had. Maybe not as agonizing journey as yours, but same self-talk. Now I'm out
Yeah,
of a job. What can I do?
yeah,
Am I
exactly.
am I going to use the same CV that I've been using for the past
Yeah,
20 years, the same thing?
yeah,
Or this is what I was talking about. Or should I learn something new, something
yeah.
totally new? Maybe it will, add something. So when I started the journey, I started on myself, and then I went to the coaching area, and
Mm-hmm,
I was taught by Indians how to become mindful. Never,
mm-hmm.
I never understood the concept, but
Yeah,
to deal with your emotions. I mean, I was taught a very lovely meditation of how to deal with your emotions, like
mm-hmm.
like the animation, which is called the one with the feelings. If you can remember,
Yeah,
came out a few years ago. It's the same thing. So you're sitting in the forest, meditating under a very beautiful tree,
mm-hmm.
and your emotions start to come as persons,
Yeah,
as people. So we start usually with the worst kind of emotion. My mentor usually starts with disgust, then anger, and then sadness, and then
yeah,
fear, and until we come to happiness, contentment, peaceful bliss, whatever, any other emotions
yeah,
that are positive, and we deal with them as such, because today people don't know how to deal with regardless if they're in grief or not. They don't know how to deal with it. And
no, they don't.
they think that anger is a bad emotion.
Mm.
And now, if someone asks me, I would say no. Anger is a good, it's a bad emotion, but it's there for a certain reason. It's not there.
Yeah, it's a signal.
It's a signal. Sadness is a signal. Fear is a signal. So
Yeah.
So this is why I was asking you this question, because for me, if I was in a growth mindset and I was in that journey, I wouldn't have changed at all.
Yeah.
No matter who is going to coach me, who's going to tell me what books to read, what I will not, go away out of my comfort zone, and I will be as stubborn as a mule, and I will continue on the path that I think is correct. So this is why
I think it's an interesting one. I think that still would become, for most people, even with a relatively fixed mindset, where the pain would become intolerable and they would have to do something. Now, they might not take advice from other people. I would agree with that bit, but I do think in the main, people they don't like pain. They will do something to get themselves out of pain. It's just the depth of pain that one has to experience before they take action is probably what's different between the two.
Yeah, and the pain could be not just physical. For my case, it was extreme depression.
Yeah.
Even though I was meditating, I was doing all techniques that I advocate as a mental health advocate, but I started to seek therapy, and I told my therapist, I told her, I'm doing everything that I'm telling the people to do, but there are good days, there are bad days. I feel angry. I feel, feeling that nothing's going to change. All those feelings were there, and there were days that I was up, days that I was down. And I always say this to anyone who explains that I meet, because they would always think, Laura, they have a misconception of us individuals, that we're always happy, that we're always optimistic, but they don't know that being optimistic is a result of going through difficult times.
Yeah, totally.
What worse can happen to you, for example? What worse can happen?
And that's what, for me, it's like people say to me, oh, don't want to step out of your comfort zone. And I would say it drives me a little bit nuts, because I'm sort of sitting there going, I have been flung so far out of my comfort zone. Exactly. I actually don't even know where it is anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's like, where is it? Almost actually get me back there, because actually it'd be nice to know where that nicer comfort space is.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're absolutely right. It's,
and I always tell people,
sorry.
I always tell people, today, if you want to become something different in the world, you have to leave your comfort zone. You don't need to go through a difficult journey, an agony of losing your loved one or losing your health. You don't have to do that. In
fact, it's preferable not to do that.
It's perfect, of course. But human beings by nature are they have a difficulty in changing. They don't very resisting. They resist so much to any kind of change, even for themselves. So I say that to a person today working in a corporate life. Today I don't work in a corporate life, thank God. I mean, for me, it's the godsend. But if I say that to a person in a corporate life, he'll tell me, so what do you want me to do? If I leave the company, what do you want? I always tell him, think what you can do. You don't have to leave the company today, but think.
No. And I think that's where, for me, that's where the work I do with Project Me doesn't make bridging that gap between where they are to where they want to be so huge. Because what we do is we kind of work on, we start where we are, but then we work on what that looks like. But then we're just bridging the gap with small steps through, as I say, these 3 A's, and we're just getting slower and we're making it so that it's not a giant leap, is, you know, something that feels, no, actually, I can do this. You know, it's far more structured, because actually one thing you do learn when you lose everything is actually how structured life is. And that, you know, even if we don't realize it, getting up to go to work at 8 o'clock or to take the kids to school. I don't have kids, so, you know, I didn't even have that as my frame of reference. But you get what I'm saying, is that all of these things, you know, they're done to a time. So if you were to sort of take a step back, there is a structure, there's a timetable in our day. And all that's doing is keeping us safe. So effectively, Project Me is like a framework that I use with clients to keep them safe whilst they are making these changes.
I mean, I did Project Me for myself, but without me realizing after what you were
saying.
Yeah, you know, I started during the pandemic. I started to read more. I started to sleep better. I started to wake up earlier. I started to exercise, try to do a diet, and stayed on it. I quit smoking. You know, I didn't smoke cigarettes. I used to smoke, you know, pipes, the ones in Egypt. You know, the
I know what you mean.
And they're terrible, and they're way more harmful than cigarettes. So, touch wood. This is my 4th year stopping.
Wow.
And
incredible.
It's I mean, so, you know, I did the Project Me thing with a structure that I started to do, and until today I have that structure. My wife, at that time, I told her, if I don't do that, I will definitely drive myself crazy, drive you crazier, and go into a state of ultimate depression that I know I won't be able to come out. So that is one way of how I wanted to cope. So actually, you answered the question, because I wanted to know. No, you talk about transition of one's life, but no one knows how to do that. I mean, unless, of course, you're thrown into the
unless you're thrown into
and you do that. But
I think we do deep down. I think we do actually know how to do the transitions. I think the world tells us that we all want to fit in and we want to belong, bottom line. And the world tells us that it has to look, feel, be a certain way. Our education system sets us up with that little narrative. So, as you have to be a
doctor, you have to be
totally. You know, and success, you know, if you follow the teacher and these sequential steps, you know, life will get on, success, etc. Of course, we know that that's not real life. And that's why so many people, you know, fall by the wayside, because they're kind of looking at that as the version of success. Whereas in actual fact, the version of success is within us. And at the point at which we identify what success means to us, I really being aligned with, as I say, what I call brand me, that's at the point at which, oh my goodness, it's so much easier. Life, we're not pushing water uphill with a rake. You know, amazingly, we're working with ourselves. And gosh, what a surprise, things happen and we feel happy, we don't feel stressed. I mean, you know, go figure. You know, because we're working with what is innately within us. And we're belonging in our own skin, ultimately, not belonging in somebody else's skin, where all that we're going to do is create more disconnection for ourselves and make us more unhappy. But you make a really good point, though, about, you know, the fact that you could have very easily been drawn into a deep depression if you hadn't have taken those actions. I think that's the thing, you know, it's back to my point about there's things in life that we can't change. You talked about, you know, obviously that, you know, the demise of your job. That's something you couldn't change, but you could change where you focused so that you didn't get drawn into that depression. And I suppose that's the thing for me. And I go back to the days when I was, you know, I had to be spend 7 months in the acute eating disorder unit in a London hospital in order to get over it because I made myself so ill. And I never, ever, ever understood why every single day we would have to write in the most minute detail exactly when we'd eaten, what we'd eaten. And I mean, I just sat there going, I could have told you there were calories in water back then, and literally had I had a sip at 6 in the morning, because that's the obsession that you get to feel in control of something when you have an eating disorder. It wasn't about being thin, it was about being in control of a world I wasn't in control of. Yeah. So I chose something external rather than control myself. And so and therein lies the problem. You know, it's the classic phrase of what you focus on grows. So if you focus on the fact that, you know, what you've eaten and what you've not eaten, what a surprise, that gets bigger. So no surprises. It took me about 4 months to say, no, I'm not feeling this thing anymore, because I'm actually feeling worse with it. I needed the freedom of what ultimately I call self-expression beyond words, which is things like photography, dance, music, things where it's still very emotional, and you can choose that, you know, as it resonates with you. But I couldn't put into words what I was actually feeling. I knew I was feeling some things, but I didn't know how to do it. And I certainly didn't want to make any bigger my food and that whole thing, because I was getting, as you rightly point out, you could have been drawn back into the depression. I was being drawn back into the very thing I was trying to break free of. And it becomes like a tipping point. So like a set of scales is, once you've done enough small steps in the sunshine space, shall we call it? Exactly, it kind of lifts up and you have this whole changing dynamic, and that's where the momentum gets faster. But to your point earlier on, it is about pacing yourself, especially in the early days, because if you go too fast, you'll undermine all of that. And, you know, I talk about 7 P's of proactive choice, and pace is number 1. Because if you don't, but the whole thing is, you know, in a busy world, we're too busy for having, you know, the next thing. I mean, I spent half my life trying to catch up with everybody else. I mean, in a month, some days I was never, I mean, what was I trying to do to myself? I was never going to catch up with anybody else because I'd not been in school for 2 years. I had a totally different experience to anybody else amidst my peers between the ages of 13, 15. So how was I possibly going to catch up? And that's where, getting back to what was my pace, how was I going to be patient, persistent? How was I going to create my play, my pause? How was I going to find my purpose that was right for me? But those are, as I say, you know, the 7 P's of proactive choice, but they are a choice.
Okay. So I would ask you the next question, but I think you answered, because I wanted to know from you the five top tips of how to navigate uncertainty in your life. So you would say the 7 P's are your 5 tips, or 7 tips, of course.
So what I put them 5 tips, I'd say is 3 A's and 6 baseline questions. So the 3 A's are acknowledge. Okay. Where are you? What are you feeling and noticing are the 2 baseline questions. Act. Okay. What do I want to feel? And what action can I take that is within my control? Okay. And attain, which is then what might stop me and what support can I seek? And so it's not strictly 5 tips. That's okay. But it's 3 A's and 6 baseline questions, which I think is fairly easy to remember. Yeah, of course.
So I always like to ask this question to my guests. What is one word or one sentence that describes Laura?
One word that describes me.
I have the sentence for me. not knowing you that long, but I can tell you what I think.
Okay, go on. Tell me, Mo. Tell me, Mo. What word do you think of?
I think of love of life.
Yeah, definitely. The word I was going to say was alive, and I think because some people say you don't take life very seriously, Laura. And I actually take life incredibly seriously. People matter to me massively.
Yeah.
But I equally know how painful, we haven't even touched the surface of the pain through my life. Yeah. It's not relevant because in my mind it's what we do and how we shape the world as a consequence of that. And for me, that is what I am so passionate about. Is I do see a world which is different, where we can seek to understand, where we can allow others for their voices to be heard with kindness, with compassion, that is without judgment, without criticism, without their fear of being rejected, so that they know that they can turn up in the world and connect with a world in which they wish to belong in. And that is absolutely, at the very essence of who I am. And so for me, that it's not, my sense of wanting to be alive and to love what is presented to me and take advantage of everything, absolutely. But underneath it all, it's for a desire of, connectivity, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So my final question to you, what's your dream?
What, sorry?
Your dream. What is your dream?
What's my dream? I think for me is that Project Me really comes to life. Yeah. And by that, I mean that people recognize, people have their own Project Me's, but recognizing that they have it. Because as you rightly pointed out, you've been on your own Project Me. Yeah. Project Me is it's about the self. But how much more enjoyable life is as a consequence of Project Me. And so for me, that is what bringing it to life is. And obviously I want to travel too, sharing that message. I like a good travel.
Of course, of course. Laura, thank you for being with us on the show. I mean,
my pleasure.
It's such an amazing story you shared with us. And I really hope that the future is bright and good for you. And I hope that we can come to Egypt and visit the pyramids and the Sphinx and Luxor and Aswan.
Absolutely.
Yeah. See, I'm trying to market my own country on my podcast.
I have been to Egypt. In fact, actually, I crossed the Sinai Peninsula before they closed it to Western tourists. Actually, yeah. So I have been several times. I've been on business as well as pleasure, but I'm always up for coming to Egypt anytime, particularly when it's raining in the UK.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for being with us. It's such an amazing episode. I really enjoyed your talk, and you taught me a lot of things I didn't know about, and I hope we can collaborate in the future.
I'm sure
it will be awesome. Thank you, Laura.
No, my absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening to today's episode. Hopefully you enjoyed our talk. Until next week, God bless you and be safe.